The Vral delegation waited in silence, their breathing apparatuses clicking nervously. The atmosphere in the chamber was breathable, technically, but not to them. That had always amused him. "You look tense, General," said Ambassador Malachi Vox, gently stirring his tea with a metal rod. It wasn't a spoon, just a thin strip of forged Terran steel. It clicked every time it met the porcelain. Click. 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 General Tsar's mandibles flared, flickering in the low light. "Your presence here is a risk. The Emperor demands your immediate withdrawal." Malachi took a sip, then exhaled as if the flavor reminded him of something ancient. "The Emperor sends demands. I respond with invitations." Tsar bristled. "What you call invitations, we call ideological warfare. Your so-called cultural events have sparked riots across 3 provinces. Children are painting over our war murals with cats. Ah yes, art. Invasive, isn't it?" He leaned forward, voice silk-wrapped steel. "Tell me, General, how does a painting undermine an empire?" Tsar slammed a clawed hand against the table. "It starts with paintings. Then comes language. Then belief. We have evidence, Vox. You've encoded rebellion into every phrase." Vox smiled. "Evidence is such a delicate word. Much like faith. Or loyalty. You see, General, when I teach your people to question, it is they who choose what to believe. Or unbelieve." The chamber dimmed as orbital shielding engaged, an automatic precaution, but to Vox, it felt like the room was holding its breath. "Do you deny it then?" Tsar asked. "That you're behind the uprisings?" Malachi set the steel rod down beside his cup, folding his hands calmly. "Do you believe your empire would collapse if not for me?" Tsar hesitated. That flicker was all Malachi needed. "Interesting," he continued. "Because if your citizens were so loyal, so devout, so committed, wouldn't my presence be irrelevant? A whisper in a hurricane?" Tsar stood. "You will be detained until our council decides your fate." Malachi didn't move. "Oh, General. It's far too late for detainment." The room's walls began to pulse, a subtle signal. Tsar turned, growling a command. 2 guards entered, weapons drawn. Malachi stood slowly, adjusting his lapel. "You've mistaken diplomacy for surrender." Again. His voice dropped. "Let me explain what you've invited into your house." One of the guards lunged. Malachi whispered a single phrase. "Protocol javelin." The guard froze mid-strike, eyes wide. His weapon dropped. He turned, gun raised at his fellow. Tsar shouted. "What is this?" The second guard screamed, shot his partner, and immediately fell to his knees, trembling violently. "He's in my head! He's in my head!" Malachi sighed. "That one heard my voice during a poetry reading on Tarsa 4. The other was served a drink by my assistant on Vex Station. It's not about toxins, General. It's about conditioning. Language. Tone. Cadence." Tsar reached for his communicator. Malachi kicked the table. It launched forward with such force it shattered against Tsar's chest plate, sending him crashing backward into the hollow display. Sparks flew. "You're a war criminal!" Tsar screamed. "No," Malachi said, stepping over debris. "I'm a redemption vector. I don't kill people. I liberate their sense of self. Unfortunately for you, that includes the idea of your empire." Tsar crawled back, panting. "What are you?" Malachi knelt beside him. "I'm what happens when you try to silence a war hero with a peace treaty. I'm what they built in the basement of broken battles. The Federation didn't disarm me. They rebranded me." The guard on the floor whimpered, shaking uncontrollably, whispering. "His words, they echo, they repeat." Malachi stood. "You didn't lose the war, General. You signed the end of it, without asking what we turned into." The door hissed open. A young Vral officer burst in, eyes wild. "Sir! All outer colonies, rebellion. Simultaneous. We've lost 7 sectors in 3 minutes. They're using Terran tactical slogans as scripture." Malachi raised a finger. "Ah, yes. Operation Revelations. Took years to seed that one. But planting ideas is like planting bombs. Do it right, and even silence becomes detonation. Tsar reached for his blade. You think you've won? Malachi shook his head. Oh no. Winning is crude. Predictable. I didn't come to win. I came to undermine your ability to conceive of winning. The blade came up. Malachi caught Tsar's wrist, twisted it with clinical precision, and leaned in close. Do you know how many Tavari dream in Terran now? How many whisper human myths into their children's ears? You let us speak. That was your first mistake. Tsar fell back, disarmed. The younger officer looked between them. What do we do now? Malachi turned to him, his voice suddenly kind. You decide. That's the beauty of it. I didn't come to conquer. I came to offer a choice. The officer hesitated, then dropped to one knee. We were never free, he said softly. Until now. Tsar's breath caught. Traitor. Truth, the officer said. Malachi picked up his steel rod again and walked toward the door. Have someone clean this up. The Chancellor is waiting for me on Calyx Prime. She requested a sermon on unity. He paused, glancing back. And if the Emperor asks where I went... He smiled like a knife being unsheathed. Tell him I'm already inside the cathedral of his mind. The door sealed behind him. Click. 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 Revolution, and an empire crumbling one conversation at a time. The Vral Imperial Palace was a fortress carved from obsidian and pride. Every inch screamed control. But in the war room, the screams had gone quiet. He walked out. The Emperor said flatly. No blood. No violence. And yet 7 sectors fell the same hour. High Strategist Ryvek bowed. Sire, the revolts were not spontaneous. They were rehearsed. The Emperor's spines twitched. Are you telling me this man rehearsed an empire-wide insurrection using conversation? Yes, Your Eminence. Then this is no diplomat. The Emperor growled. This is psychological artillery wrapped in silk. The chamber's lights flickered. Ryvek cleared his throat. He left a message. Play it. A hologram crackled to life. Malachi Vox appeared, calm, poised, hands folded. He wasn't smiling. That was worse. You should have kept me in chains. The recording ended. The Emperor's claws dug into the stone table. Summon the Ash Choir. Activate neural disruption satellites. I want every human transmission crushed before it reaches atmosphere. Ryvek hesitated. With respect, Your Eminence, it's not just transmission. It's the ideas themselves. They're viral. Recursive. Our linguists say his phrasing creates ideological loops. The more you resist, the more it spreads. The Emperor turned slowly. Then what do you suggest? We submit? No, Ryvek said. We fight. But not with force. There was silence. We send a counter-voice. Ryvek continued. Someone immune to his rhetoric. Someone who doesn't believe in words. Who? My brother, he said. General Thrask Ryvek. Warborn. Brain-grafted during the Titan campaigns. Vox's weapon is language. Thrask doesn't speak. Hours later, deep in the catacombs beneath the palace, a vault opened. Thrask Ryvek emerged. His eyes glowed with neural overlays, his skin a lattice of steel and scar. He wore no armor, he didn't need it. Everything about him radiated brutality barely restrained. He didn't bow. The Emperor stepped back. We're not requesting an arrest. We're requesting an exorcism. Thrask said nothing. He turned and walked out. Malachi waited in the garden of the Ubral Archive, sipping from a new cup. Tavari children played in the distance, laughing in human-accented Tavari. The sky was too quiet. Then he felt it. The shift in pressure. The killing intent. He turned. Thrask stood 30 feet away, silent as stone, watching him with predator calm. You're not here to talk, Malachi said. Thrask didn't blink. You're their silence, he mused. They tried speeches. Then fire. Now they send a man who doesn't believe in sound. Thrask moved. One moment he was standing. The next he was sprinting, silent, fast, brutal. Malachi dropped the tea and dodged, barely. Thrask struck with bone-breaking force. A pillar cracked behind them. You'll find, Malachi said, rolling to his feet. My defense is not my fists. Thrask didn't wait. Another charge. Another strike. Malachi twisted, whispering, Red Sigil, Layer 6. For a heartbeat, Thrask's movement slowed. Not stopped, delayed. Enough for Malachi to slip past and slam a pressure point in the back of his neck. Nothing. Thrask grabbed his wrist mid-motion, flipped him, and drove him into the earth. Pain laced Malachi's back. He coughed blood. You're not susceptible to triggers, he gasped. No language? No patterns? No entry points? Thrask lifted him again, this time by the throat. And yet, Malachi choked, smiling. You came to me. Thrask's grip tightened. If I didn't matter, he wheezed, they wouldn't have sent you. Something flickered in Thrask's eyes. Malachi leaned in. They've already lost. Thrask threw him. Malachi hit the garden wall and collapsed in a heap. Bones cracked. Vision blurred. He laughed softly. Your silence is their last word. How poetic. Thrask advanced. Malachi raised a trembling hand. Protocol Eden. A high-pitched tone rang from his palm. Thrask faltered, only slightly, but it was enough. Malachi surged forward, slamming a chip into the side of Thrask's neck. It didn't penetrate, but it pulsed. The garden around them shifted. Not physically, perceptually. Holograms engaged. The trees became charred ruins. The sky turned blood red. Screams echoed from nowhere. Thrask's implants glitched. He staggered. Welcome to your mind, Malachi said, voice suddenly calm again. I've recreated the Titan campaign, using your own trauma loops. You remember what you did on Ivorus Prime, don't you? Thrask shook violently. For the first time, he grunted. A noise. Almost a word. You slaughtered your own men to buy 3 minutes of orbital delay. And then, they didn't fire. Thrask swung wildly, smashing illusions. But they didn't fade. I don't need language, Malachi said softly. I just need memory. Thrask roared. The sky cracked. The garden vanished. They were back. Malachi was bleeding. Thrask was breathing hard. You don't speak, Malachi said, rising slowly. But you feel. And that's all I ever needed. Thrask lunged one final time. Malachi didn't move. At the last second, Thrask stopped. His body shook. His hands trembled mid-strike. The chip at his neck flashed. Malachi whispered, Protocol Mercy. Thrask dropped to his knees. Malachi stepped forward, gently touched his head. You've been taught silence is strength. But silence is surrender. They built you to be immune to words. I built myself to be what words become. Thrask collapsed, unconscious. Malachi knelt beside him. I forgive you, he said. That's the final command. He stood, swaying. Behind him, a dozen rebels emerged, former Tavari guards, now followers. It's done, Malachi said. Broadcast the image. Let them see their final weapon kneeling in silence. The rebels bowed. And the Emperor? Malachi smiled. He'll give a speech. It will be his last. They vanished into the mist, leaving behind a shattered weapon and the echo of a war that was never fought, only spoken into existence. The throne room was colder than Malachi remembered. Not temperature, atmosphere. The chill of brittle power. Cracks in polished obsidian. Silence where once thunder ruled. You came alone, the Emperor said, seated high above. Brave. Not bravery, Malachi replied, voice steady. Efficiency. The guards lined along the walls did not move. Their armor gleamed. Their loyalty, uncertain. He could feel their eyes tracing every breath he took. "You've assassinated our icons with whispers," the Emperor said. "You've made my generals defect without lifting a blade. You bent our gods into memes. What's next, human? Do you intend to conquer our dreams?" Malachi smiled. "Why would I conquer what you've already surrendered?" The Emperor's claw tightened on the armrest. "You're here to kill me," he said. "No," Malachi replied. "You're doing that yourself. I'm here to offer a funeral." "For what?" "For the last illusion you rule." The Emperor rose. Towering. Majestic. Lethal. "I am the sovereign of 40 suns. My word bends light. My breath drives war. You will not lecture me on illusion." "You're not a sovereign," Malachi said. "You're a broadcast tower. They built you to be heard, not believed. And your people have stopped listening." A low growl echoed from the guards. "You manipulate," the Emperor said. "Corrupt. Infect. You smile like a messiah and rot the soul like a plague." Malachi nodded. "Yes." That single word struck the chamber like a meteor. Even the guards shifted, unsure if permission had just been granted or taken. "You admit it?" the Emperor snarled. "Of course," Malachi said. "I'm the symptom of your decay, not the cause. I don't corrupt. I catalyze." "Then why come here?" the Emperor asked. "Why not let me burn in the fallout of your lies?" "Because some deaths," Malachi said softly, "are too important to leave to rumor." The Emperor stepped down from the dais, claws tapping with each movement. "You think I fear death? I think you fear irrelevance. I think you'd rather die on a throne than vanish in a footnote." The Emperor bared his teeth. Malachi reached into his coat slowly, carefully. Every guard aimed a weapon. He pulled out a simple object, a Vral ceremonial blade. "This belonged to High Warlord Trazek," he said. "She gave it to me before she burned her own fleet." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "I told her the truth," Malachi continued. "That loyalty without meaning is slavery. That obedience without choice is fear in drag. She understood. She chose freedom over order. You drove her mad." The Emperor spat. "I gave her the words. She did the rest." "You won't do the same to me," the Emperor said, stepping closer. "I was born in the pyres of empire. My blood is law. My voice is reality." Malachi held the blade out, handle first. "Then speak. Use your voice. Command your destiny." The Emperor stared. No one moved. The room was suspended between seconds. "I've studied your kind," he said slowly. "You win with symbols. You think gestures replace war." "No," Malachi said. "War is loud. Symbols echo longer." The Emperor took the blade. Malachi nodded. "Do it." The guards stiffened. "Kill me in your own court. Silence the myth. End the narrative." The Emperor raised the blade, then paused. Malachi met his eyes, unwavering. "This is your moment. The last chance to shape how history speaks your name." The Emperor trembled, not from fear, but conflict. Around him, the guards waited for a signal. Some wanted blood. Some wanted a reason to not believe what they'd already begun to feel. "Why aren't you afraid?" the Emperor asked. "Because you already lost," Malachi replied. "The moment you made this conversation possible." The Emperor dropped the blade. It clattered against the stone. "Coward!" one of the guards muttered. The Emperor turned, fury igniting. "I am no coward!" "You are," Malachi said quietly. "But that's not a flaw. It's a beginning." The Emperor's voice cracked. "What did you do to me?" "I listened." The silence snapped. One of the guards removed his helmet. Another followed. Then a third. "Your people aren't betraying you," Malachi said. "They're becoming themselves." The Emperor backed toward the throne, realization breaking over him. "I was the voice of order. You were the echo of fear," Malachi corrected. The guards approached, not to kill, but to turn away. Their backs faced the throne. "No," the Emperor whispered. Not like this. He dropped to his knees. History will call this treason, he said bitterly. No, Malachi said, stepping forward. History will call this a conversation. The Emperor looked up. Then speak. Malachi knelt beside him. Very well, he whispered. The guards couldn't hear the words. They weren't meant to. But when Malachi stood again, the Emperor remained still. Not dead. Not broken. Just silent. Malachi turned to the guards. Your leader is no longer your master. He's now your peer. Treat him as such. What do we do? One asked. You decide, Malachi said. That's what freedom is. They watched him go. No one stopped him. No one could. Outside, the crowd waited, not for orders, but for meaning. Malachi stood before them. I was once a soldier, he said. I believed peace was something you forced on the defeated. I was wrong. The crowd leaned in. Peace, he said, is what you choose when you know no one is coming to save you from yourselves. Peace is earned by reclaiming your voice. Silence. Then cheers. Shouts. Not of war. Not of conquest. Of awakening. He walked away, robes catching the wind. One child, Vral and human hybrid, followed him. Ambassador? The child asked. Yes? Were you ever scared? He paused. All the time, he said. But I taught myself a trick. What trick? Pretend every word you say. He smiled. Is the last thing someone will believe. The child thought for a moment, then nodded. I'll remember that. I know. He disappeared into the mist. Behind him, the Empire became something else. Not conquered. Conversationally reborn. The chamber was vast, cold, and silent. Its grandeur dwarfed the most elegant of palaces, its walls towering high enough to make even the Emperor himself seem insignificant. Malachi stood at the center, his eyes scanning the colossal throne where the Vral Council sat. You've come, the Supreme Chancellor's voice boomed from above. And you think you can undo what we've built? What we've fought for? What we've bled for? Malachi didn't flinch. He didn't move. His presence alone was enough to cause unease. The council, once so confident, shifted in their seats, the weight of his words hanging over them like an executioner's axe. I've come for something you'll never understand, Malachi said, his voice crisp and deliberate, like a cold wind cutting through steel. I've come for your freedom. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. Freedom? You would dare lecture us about freedom? You, who manipulate minds like puppets? I don't manipulate, Malachi said. I open the door. What you choose to do with it is on you. You think we are foolish? One of the council members sneered. We know your tricks, Vox. We've studied every word, every phrase you've spoken. You can't hide behind your facade forever. Malachi's lips curled into a smile, cold and calculating. I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm exposing you for what you are, trapped in your own system. You can't speak the truth because you've forgotten what it even sounds like. Enough of this, the Chancellor shouted, rising from his seat. You think you can break us? We've spent centuries building this empire. We've crushed worlds, shattered stars. What makes you believe you, a human, can stop it? Malachi's eyes bored into the Chancellor. Because you don't even understand why it's crumbling. The room froze. Silence. No one dared speak, no one moved. Malachi's words hung like an open wound, festering and raw. The truth, Malachi continued, is that you've sold your souls for control. You didn't want peace. You didn't want unity. You wanted submission. You built a facade of strength because you were afraid of the real thing, freedom. The Chancellor's face twisted in rage. You! I'm not here to listen to your empty threats. Malachi cut him off. I'm here to give you a choice. I'll leave. You can remain on your throne, ruling over a dying empire, or you can let go and let your people choose their own path. The council laughed. A low, mocking sound. You truly believe we'll let you walk out of here alive, do you? You can kill me, Malachi said, his voice steady. But that won't change what's already been done. It won't stop what's coming. One of the guards raised his weapon, aiming it at Malachi's chest. The others followed suit. The tension in the room grew thick enough to choke on. I think you've already lost, Malachi said. His smile faded. Because you've never learned to ask the right question. The guard hesitated. What are you afraid of? Malachi asked. Why are you still following orders from a system that's already dying? What makes you think this illusion of control will save you? The guard's hand trembled. For a moment, Malachi saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Then the guard's weapon lowered. The Chancellor's voice cracked. Do you think this is over? Do you think the people will follow you? You've poisoned their minds with your lies. Malachi stepped forward. No. I've given them a choice. They can take it or leave it. The room erupted into chaos. Guards drew their weapons. The council members shouted commands, trying to regain control. But Malachi didn't flinch. He was no longer the human they had underestimated. He was a force they could no longer ignore. Enough! The Chancellor bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. Kill him! But the guards didn't move. Do you see? Malachi said, his voice cutting through the chaos. You've lost your power. Not because of me, but because of you. The moment you decided that control was more important than truth, you sealed your fate. The Chancellor's eyes widened in horror. What have you done? Malachi smiled, his voice a low whisper, barely audible over the rising din. I didn't do anything. You did. You just didn't realize it until now. With that, he turned and walked out of the chamber. The guards did not stop him. The council members stared in stunned silence as he left, the weight of his words crushing them. The door slammed shut behind him. Malachi stepped out into the hall, the sounds of the crumbling empire echoing in his mind. The rebellion was no longer just a spark, it was a fire, sweeping through the hearts of the people. They would rise not because he had told them to, but because they had finally seen the truth. He didn't look back. In the distance, a rebel leader approached him. The man bowed his head. It's done. The broadcast went out. The people are rising. Malachi nodded. It's not over yet. We've only shown them the door. What they do with it is up to them. You think they'll choose freedom? The rebel leader asked. Malachi glanced at the sky. The first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the city. I don't think they'll have a choice. The rebel leader smiled. Then let's give them the chance. Malachi's gaze hardened. We don't need to give them anything. They already have it. All we have to do now is make sure they don't lose it. The rebel leader nodded. What's next? Malachi took a deep breath. Now we build. The two men walked into the streets, joined by others, once loyal soldiers, officers, civilians, all now united in one cause: freedom. The empire would fall, but the people would rise. And this time, they wouldn't need a king, an emperor, or a god to tell them how to live. Malachi had given them the truth. The rest was up to them.